Real life
Superpowers.
I think all of us have those labels that are being put on us. And if you don't take that act of defining who you are and knowing who you are and stepping into your bigness, then you will be defined into your smallness. That's just the physics of how things work in the world.
Hey guys! As a podcast about peak performance, we get a rare opportunity to speak with some truly remarkable people. And it's not that we don't believe every person is or can be remarkable, but some people stand out, making the impossible possible. And it seems they do so by first and maybe foremost being the best version of themselves and inspiring others to do the same. Such is today's guest. Henry the CEO has shifted the tectonic plates of human history. He's one of the key players that helped get Barack Obama elected in 2008, serving as the chief operating officer of the Obama presidential campaign, and then serving as deputy assistant to the president in the Obama White House for 2.5 years. He spent many years with the social organization Ashoka. He's a keynote speaker, campaign strategist, and leadership advisor. He's recently published a book called CHANGEMAKER PLAYBOok, The New Physics of Leadership in a World of Explosive Change. He's engaged with the world's leading social and business entrepreneurs, bringing his change-making framework to boardrooms, newsrooms, community forums, university institutions, and governmental halls all over the world. He's helped global leaders cultivate in themselves and in others the qualities of the changemaker as he defines them: an innovative mind, a service heart, an entrepreneurial spirit, and a collaborative outlook. In our conversation, we delve into all of that and more. I hope you check it out and enjoy your listen.
Real life
Superpowers.
Up in the sky, it's a bird. It's a plane.
Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology.
It's alive!
real life
Superpowers.
Henry, welcome to Real Life Superpowers.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure.
What are you up to these days?
Oh my goodness. Well, right now I'm just, I've been settling my family in Washington, D.C. We've been in Australia for a year, and now we're back here in the United States. So we're just kind of getting reoriented to things.
What were you doing there?
I've been working with Walk Free, which is an organization that's combating modern slavery.
Wow. Have you always been trying to do things that are impactful since you remember yourself?
I grew up in a very rural setting in California. At the foothills, sort of at the gateway to Sequoia National Park, where the giant redwoods are. I think that was just on some level that was an isolated life, and we had the same 12 kids in my class growing up through school. And I think the thing for me was I was always kind of looking out. I enjoyed the lakes and the rivers and the tennis and basketball and all those things, but there was always just a world outside of where I was. So I guess I was always wanting to scratch at that a little bit, see what that was like. And I guess I've always wanted to make some kind of a scratch in the world that would be lasting, but I'm not sure I knew what that was.
And how did your career evolve?
Well, so, I think, look, going back to my very earliest days, I remember being, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, 10, I can't remember, but I remember, we had 3 channels on our television set. You'd have to bang it to get it to come in right, black and white, it's fuzzy and the whole thing. But there was this one show that came on in the summer when I was about 12 years old. It was my first reality show. I call it the Watergate hearings. It was when Nixon was going through an impeachment process. And I remember I was compelled by that. And so I think on some level, I didn't lose my faith in government during that process. I actually think it was important for me to see how it played out. And I felt confident about that. And I guess I think that's how I kind of had an inkling that was how I could have it make a difference in the world, was through politics.
What about it? Like, what caught you?
First of all, I think it was just, Ronan, it was this kind of far away place with these characters. We had Judge Sirica and, John Dean and all these kind of characters that were around the president. So it was just a story that I could follow that was different from the evening news. And then I think as it sort of played itself out, I thought, well, the country can get through a crisis. And then I just thought at that point, I became interested in, Bobby Kennedy and so, Martin Luther King and that kind of thing. And then I just started to find that maybe that was where I could grab onto, a place I could grab onto.
was your whole family following, and sort of were you voicing to them that you think maybe you could somehow in the future when you grow up, sort of join the system and fix it?
It's interesting. Well, again, I grew up very small in a very rural town, so I didn't really know other avenues, right? But no, I watched it by myself every day. My family was oriented, like we talked about politics, we talked about the world. It was always a dinner table conversation for us. There was just four of us. It was my brother, who's a year and a half younger than me, my mom and my dad, and we were very engaged with, what was happening in the world. But I watched that every day by myself, just at the middle of the day. It was 110 degrees outside, so this was a break in the middle of the day for me. But I found it compelling. And, I also just, I saw that White House, on television every night in the evening news. Again, it was Washington, D.C. was such a faraway place back then. But somehow I think I always thought it wasn't like a goal. It was just like, I think I'm going to be there someday. I don't know how, I didn't think about it any more than that. I wasn't directing my career that way. So I studied politics in college. I went on to become a labor organizer, and I did that for 15 years. But then the moment is I think it's interesting to tie this back was, we started running union members for political office. And I found that I had a knack for that, and I liked it. And I liked helping people to learn how to build their own organization to make their own change. And so that was, it's politics, it's like running for office is like a startup. And so I had a knack for that. I helped them. I think the difference for me than others was where others would say, we'll teach you how to give a speech or how to raise money or whatever that is. I had an approach that I will teach you how to be the CEO of your own organization. And then you can do those things that can help you unseat the other dog catcher you're running against, or whatever that is. So I found my passion that way. And then I took a year off, went to the Kennedy School, 15 years into my career, got studied up on how to run political campaigns. And then that ultimately is what led to, my pathway into the Obama campaign in 2007.
And what do you think gave you that visceral belief that you are able to help people do things larger than life? Because it seems like it was pretty clear to you.
Yeah, you weren't watching cartoons.
No, I don't know. I wonder if I was or not. But no, I think you're right. I think I write about this in Changemaker Playbook, which is the book that I just put out a year ago, about just under a year ago. And one of the things I found is that changemakers do have experiences. I like the question you're asking, Noah, because I think changemakers do have experiences in their youth that help them build that sort of, it's not even a confidence muscle, but on some level it is just that sense that you can overcome what you don't know.
Yeah.
And for me, and so if I go to the book and say what the principle is, it is, empathy as a child, which is usually modeled by adults. It is learning around your passion in your preteen years, which again, my White House, that sort of watching that television show was was a way that I was learning, I think. Getting an idea and putting a team around your idea in your teens, and then leaving to learn, throughout your life. And for me, I think one of those kind of moments where I pushed myself out of my comfort zone was when I ran for school vice president in my junior year. And I didn't know that. I didn't go into that with confidence. In fact, I probably thought I was going to lose. And then I went on the next year to run for president. But
Wait, did you win?
I did in my junior year. And then I ran for president in my senior year. And those were moments where pushing myself out of my comfort zone and then getting the confidence that came with putting a team around my own ideas, around my own project, and collaborating with other people. It didn't happen because of me. It really happened because I learned early on that, dream work is tied to teamwork, right? And so that's kind of how I started, I think, to get that confidence. Another moment was when I pushed myself out of my little town, and I was an exchange student in my junior year that summer, and I went to Sweden for a summer. And that was, again, stepping out of what I was comfortable with into a place that was very uncomfortable. And so those moments, I think, do shape you as you're coming into your own moment.
So like the White House was something that from a very young age you sort of marked as a goal, maybe not like very, accurately, but like felt or envisioned. And then did you find yourself sort of paving the way towards it, or was it sort of like a moonshot type of thing and you navigated in life and yet landed where you sort of envisioned?
I remember that, but I didn't have a big plan for that at all. It was one of those kind of moments in life where you just say, this is something just to remember, but it wasn't driving me at all.
What's intriguing for you also about the story that you're saying is that like it caught your eye, but also in your book and also like in your career, the thing is, you say it's like a startup, but because the product are people. So it's the hardest startup in the world because there's so there's so many things and variables and changes because it's people, right? And what's amazing is it's the hardest startup. Like it's the hardest startup because it's an X amount of time where the assets themselves have different interests, and they want to grow quickly. There's, endless amount of just problems, right? Because it's also helping people and managing also people, right? And it's managing, everything on defense where you want to be in offense and you have X amount of time and also for a campaign or whatever else. So what's interesting to me is like, you have to problem solve and adjust. And planning is like, there's an X amount and it always sporadically goes up because the position is, you're actually the executor, which is, I wouldn't say even harder, but it's, you have to actually work with all the people. One person is people working for him and you have to manage all these people. And I'm wondering for that, like, how did you do the demystification for that? Right? So doing it for yourself, I understand in school, but afterwards, like how, you know what I mean? Like you probably optimize. So I'm wondering like how badly or poorly in the beginning, the mistakes themselves, and where did it grow on that? Like, that's really interesting for me.
Yeah, I love your question. I mean, maybe we'll hit that moment in the Obama campaign just in a second, but just to build on where we've been and what you're saying, I think I learned even in that moment when I ran for my own office, right? The only time I've ever run for office after high school, it was in high school. So I've not got personal experience doing what he did on a regular basis. But one of the things I found was that if you could rather than use people for your interests, if you could channel their energies and their aspirations into what you're doing, and you can make this a collaborative effort, it works far better than trying to bring my agenda to meet other people's. Where you have kind of a fixed idea of how you want to get things done, and then you try to bring people along with your motivation. So I learned that early. I learned that as an organizer. I was going into towns, I grew up in California, so going into Texas and towns in Texas and Oklahoma, I even did this in London. I really learned how to respect where people are, what they're, learn about who they are, what their aspirations are, and then build a team that helps us to move forward. I think that was helpful to me and ultimately in politics too. I agree with what you're saying. When you get into the political arena, everybody brings their own talents and their own aspirations forward. And so when you're in the business of building a team of teams versus building an organization that kind of carries out your will, that can be very, very difficult because you really are one person can derail the agenda, right? Or whatever you're trying to get done, derail the mission. So I think that's an interesting thing. When we came to, I got the call. I didn't know anybody in the Obama campaign. I got the call and I came to Chicago very early. And, Ron, we had, you come into that office for the first time, you open those doors for the first time, and people just kind of spill out onto that, whatever it was, the 12th floor of the downtown Chicago high rise. And, you're filling this building with, first it's a big space with a few people, and then it gets really overcrowded by the time you're done. But when you come in, you don't know each other's names, and you don't have the signage on the walls. You're tearing the computers out of the boxes. You still don't have the servers up. You've got the checks coming in the mail. You don't have the bank accounts open. You don't have the cultural norm that normal organizations would have. You don't even have an employee handbook. So when you're coming into an environment like that, it really is about the bigger picture of what we're trying to do together. And you've got to be able to harness that and move it forward quickly. And then you've got to maintain that throughout the life of the organization. But I don't think in that way, I don't think a political campaign is any different than anything we're doing in life, which is coming in, tearing down walls, coming together, solving problems, and pursuing new opportunities together.
The timeline, that's the only difference. You're in, like, as a businessman, I'm saying you're in more stress. Like I'm like zoning my hands when you're saying it. I'm imagining myself, you have like X amount of time and everybody, it's like a race. Go. They have X amount. So like, what would be the 3 first like action items that you do? Like, if someone would unpack the bad case, maybe 3 people that you would call that you always like, what would be the first things that are important to have the setup?
Well, and I love that because I used to call it the business of winning. And the business of winning is basically, you've got to be able to build an organization that can outlast and outplay your opponent. But in that context, there are principles of business that apply, and there are some things that are very different. But in the context for us, we had no systems in place, and you don't have a lot of time to put them in place. So, people are spending money and you don't have that budget yet. And those are the kinds of things that you got to get control of your environment really fast. You've got to rely on, and in the case of our campaign manager, David Pluff, I think he relied on about, a dozen of us to really kind of get everything into place very quickly and in our own way. And so you're trying to move everybody together, but you know that everybody's going to get there in a different way. So you got to get the systems in place first. How do we hire? What's okay to hire? What's the process for that? What's the process for spending money? What's the process for opening offices? What's the process? All of those things that go with building the life of the campaign, you've got to get those together really, really quickly, because even as you're trying to get that in place, you've got the pressures of the candidate and the campaign bearing on the organization that doesn't even exist. So first thing is systems.
And the other one is literally the president. So he has a good organization in this, it's big competition. If
he can't prove himself the CEO of his own organization, then he's already got a problem. He or she, in this case, it's him. But so you've got to have run it like a business, he would say. He would say, run it like a business. He would say, I want it run tight. So I remember that guidance. And then we've got to get control. The second thing is, I'd say we've got to get control of the culture. We've got to be able to say, who is it? Who are we? And so we had guidance from the candidate very early. Respect everyone, build it from the bottom up. And the third one that I think gets all the play is no drama. So you have now the culture. Then you have, so when you have build it from the bottom up, that means get the tools down to where they need to be, right? So you have the sort of the foundation for the everyone a change maker, everyone a leader kind of climate that we started to, that ultimately the personality that we moved into. You have then, when you say respect everyone, right? That means that we've got to build a collaborative system here. And then no drama really just means, don't check your agenda at the door. And so that then was the culture. And ultimately, Ronan, what I think happened was we started to build, as we made that our culture, we actually started to hire to that culture. So we didn't hire based on expertise. Frankly, Hillary had all the expertise. She hired all the best talent before we really did. And so then what you start to see is that we started getting a type of person. And I described that person later as innovative mind, service heart, entrepreneurial spirit, and collaborative outlook. And that really was an offshoot of that guidance that came from Barack Obama. And then later, what the third thing is, I would just say, is the ability to understand the universe that you're engaging with. And we saw it differently. And I don't think we said it this way at the time, but we saw change makers. And so if you see that very same thing, innovative mind, service heart, entrepreneurial spirit, collaborative outlook. That wasn't just what lived in the campaign, but it lived around us. And so when you see change makers instead of voters, and this is my challenge to anyone, if you're a business leader, if you see change makers walking through your door and not customers, if you're a teacher and you see change makers coming through your door and not students, how would you build it differently? And I think in our case, that third piece is that we build an organization that could accommodate change makers.
Wow, there's so much to unpack here, but I want to rewind back just a little because I'm really curious. You were talking about the call, and I'm wondering who called you and what did they say that made you leave whatever it was that you were doing, which is also interesting to know what you were doing, and go do that.
Oh yeah. So let's go back to where I was. That's a good one. So my wife and I were living in Alexandria, Virginia. So we met while I was working, not while I was a student, but while I was working at Harvard. And then we moved. I went back to Washington, D.C. after working at Harvard to start building back into this political thing. And so we were at the time then, this a couple of years later, we were living in Old Town Alexandria, but I was in a Barnes and Noble, a bookstore in San Luis Obispo, California. So I was visiting family on the other side of the country. And my phone, there's an episode of, I don't know if you've seen it, there's an episode in West Wing where they start calling around and so they say, hey, have you seen this guy? You got to see this guy. They're all out of politics now. They're all burnt out and done with politics. And you got to see this guy and come back. Well, I had a call like that. It was not anyone I wasn't connected. I had kind of an interest in Al Gore, and I had a kind of an interest in John Edwards at the time. Barack Obama was interesting, but I knew no one in Chicago. I wasn't going that way. My phone rang, just to give you context, we're thought of as the iPhone campaign, but the iPhone didn't come out until after we announced. So I have my Motorola flip phone. It's late 2006. I pull out that flip phone. I look at it. I don't know the number, so I just kind of put it away. And then what turns out was they were starting to look at people in the campaign. I had a conversation with a guy named Steve Hildebrand, who was the deputy campaign manager. I tracked him down in South Dakota. And we talked about it. And he's like, tell me what you guys have done. I had been doing stuff now for the National Labor. And I said, look, with a cell phone, a computer, and a place that you can put a desk, you can turn someone's kitchen into a kitchen into a precinct office. You can turn a garage into a canvassing office. And I thought I had done great. I mean, I thought I nailed this interview. This was early January now. And so I'm told that the campaign manager asked Steve about what he thought about me. And Steve said, well, he has interesting ideas, which I thought must have been great news for me. And so it turns out, though, I think that I had interesting ideas, I can use air quotes, because I didn't hear from the campaign again. And he was on TV about 5 weeks later. So my conversation with Steve was in early January. Barack Obama was on TV, was on my television on a Saturday, I think it was a Saturday, in February, right around the 10th or 12th, announcing his campaign for president. And I remember saying to my wife, this isn't happening. The train has left the station and we're not on it. And then about 3 days later, my phone started up again. We'd like you to come in and look at some of our talent. I started coming in and doing some evaluation. What I realized was they were looking at me. But I didn't know it at the time. And so anyways, the bottom line is by March 1st, I was in the door, one of the first employees in the campaign. It was just one of those things where, I think, again, moments happen, right? And you just make the most of those moments.
But why did you want it?
Oh, I thought, look, I didn't think he could win. No one thought he could win. I mean, wasn't like my friends or my enemies. They'd say, what are you doing? Oh, by the way, my wife was pregnant with our first son in the very early stages and had, we had lost a pregnancy not long before that. So it was like one of those decisions, like, can we do this? And so we were it was a tough decision, but I really felt like this was an important election and he was an important figure. And I felt like we could really make a big impact in the world, even if we lost. And so for that reason, we left everything. Tie up the lease, drop your clients. My wife quit her job. We're going to have, in one day in March, I remember unwinding my business, unwinding our lease, moving to a new city, signing a new contract to join the campaign, and then getting a new house. They say that in your life, if you have like one of those things happen, you're like prone to like some kind of terrible, like a heart attack or something. Like I did about 10 of those things in one day. And when we got there were challenges for my wife. I mean, we were using the emergency room as our medical care because we didn't have a doctor yet. So now, fast forward, by the way, our son Dante was born and turned 1. Was the only child to be born and turn 1 in the campaign. So he's got the distinction of being the Obama baby. But there were some serious. We really talked it through.
What business did you unwind?
Oh, I was consulting at the time, so I was doing the stuff that I was doing with labor and different other things. So I had some clients, and but I was in the political space. I wasn't deep into it. I wasn't a known figure. So, but I had my stuff going on, and it was bringing me joy. But this was a life changer for me.
See, that's amazing to me, because this is something that's recurring with you. Like so this decision making, it's a leadership decision making in your life. Usually the decisions, we have thousands of decisions every day, but because it's those kinds of projects, what's amazing for me is you have to make those decisions, which is sort of like, you should be betting in the casino, because you're like each time going all in, right? And then closing a project and opening a project. It's like never ending. So have you ever said no? Like, how do you say, like, how many no's to make one all in? Because you can't move every time to Illinois and to Madagascar and Australia and coming back. And so, like, how do you do the decision making?
Yeah, well, I'm lucky that my wife is a change maker. So she's a good partner in this. In this case, what we said was, first of all, I would just say that I do realize, and I think there's a point you're making, I've never made a bet on myself and lost. I have, the results has sometimes turned out differently than I thought it would when I made that bet, but I've never made a bet on myself and lost. I think that's generally the case with us. I mean, I think when people really take risks with their passions, again, we're going back to this thread that you opened up, Noah, which is that early passion. What are you passionate about? What will you stand for, right? And so I've never said no, Ronan, to my passion.
So your ROI would be gaining experience, worst case scenario, so you can't lose.
I think that's right. You're going to at least learn a lot, right? So, but it is a balancing act for sure. We've been on the knife's edge as a family. But on the other hand, we've always made and I think this is just a stylistic issue for some, we've made the decision for adventure in our life. So we always think that, but it's also the Changemaker playbook. Like for my kids, now when we go to Tasmania, we're making a decision. Look, I could have gone for 3 months and been there by myself, or I could bring the family. I want the kids to have that out of their zip code experience. I want them to see the world. So we're constantly looking at ways that we can grow and the ways that our kids can go. In this case, what we said was we'll do it for a year. We'll do it for a year. We'll know by then if he's going to make this or not. And that would have been March of 2008, and by March of 2004, we knew that John Kerry was going to be the nominee. So I thought, okay, well, no. Now the problem is that this race with Hillary went all like never been done before, certainly not in my lifetime. I think went all 56 races with the territories and all, and so it went into mid-June. And so that was when we got to March, we had to make that decision. How are we doing here? Now, Dante's been born. He's 5 months old. I'm trying to balance the demands of a mushrooming campaign. At this stage, the organization's going to grow. Just for context, in the first 16 months, we went from 0 to 2,000, from 100 to 2,000 people, and from a $7 million a month to $40 million a month budget. In the last 16 weeks, we would go from 2,000 to 6,000 people, and from 40 million a month to 100 million. So now I'm in this situation of saying, what are we going to do? Because I always said the pros will come in March. Like we can step out at that point. But we actually just decided, look, we've gotten this far. We might as well go all the way with this and see, you know. And so, but that was a decision. If Sina would have said, I'm not down for this, my wife Sina, if she would have said, I'm not down for this, or we need to stop, then we would have stopped. And same thing when we went to the White House. It was like, oh, you know, this is going to, we're tired. We've got babies. Now we had a second on the way. And it's like, oh, can we do this? And we said a year. And actually, it actually stayed 2.5 years. But they're always it's always a family decision, because in politics, you might know this in business too, but in politics for sure, I've seen people make that decision by themselves without their spouse coming along or their significant other, and it went badly. So we've always made sure that we're talking together. And so whether we're going to Australia or whether we're going into the Obama campaign or whatever it is we want to do, it's always for me about where can I make the biggest impact. I'm driven by impact. I love to make impact. I love making big change. That's probably my addiction. And so it's always then. And then the other thing I do, and this might open up a whole nother thread, is I didn't notice this, but I take a sabbatical every 7 years, 6 or 7 years, for about 6 to 7 months. And that is to just sort of learn, reflect, retool, and get that map out again and say, maybe if my next biggest impact has to be stepping over here and going up this mountain instead of continuing on the climb that I'm on now.
But don't you have any FOMO or fear of missing out in that? Like, I'm always intrigued about that, because here again, we're talking about big changes. Like, you can do it because you're used to this big change, you know, and you have a great culture at home with your family that, you know, they understand it with each other. But how do you stop? Like, this year you get an offer of doing something amazing because you're probably like, you get so many. And why this year you're going to take a sabbatical and you stop strategically and say no?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't notice I did it. It wasn't until when I left Ashoka. I'd been working for Ashoka for 7 years. That was my job after the White House. I was working with the world leading social entrepreneurs, and I don't just stop. I am compelled. I am pushed. I am pulled away. I don't push myself out. I'm pulled away, whether it was the White House or whether it was Ashoka. Back to my junior year in high school, the first time I took a real sabbatical. Going to Sweden. But the thing is that what I realized is that it goes back to Noah's earliest question, which was, I think I was always driven to make a difference. I wanted to give myself to a better world. I didn't know how to do it. And I still think that I want to do that. And I'm always a player in it. I don't get to be the lead guitarist ever. I'm always kind of the drummer or something in the background. But I like being able to position myself with people who are making big change and want to do that. And then I think the key is when I take that break, it's not to say, what am I doing next? It's more like, gosh, the last time, my last sabbatical, I coached my kids' Little League team because I'd been traveling all over the world. I never could do that. So I taught a class at American University, seniors coming into college and college, kind of gap year type stuff, gap semester type stuff. And I learned, and I found out what sort of fed me and my spirit. And then there's just something that comes up. When I left Ashoka, it was because I really wanted to write about these amazing change makers I'd come in contact with over 7 years, the world leading social entrepreneurs. And what I was compelled by was not their big ideas. It was how they made change. And I thought that's what we can all learn. And to your point, I think if you stop, that's when you have problems, because this is a world that is moving so fast, and a world that you don't get to stop anymore. If you try to stay in one place in this world where change is the only constant, then you're going to lose. You're going to fall behind the wave as it goes by, and you're not going to be able to live in harmony with the way the world is going. So we've lived in this world where repetition was the thing, and everybody got their skill, and you apply your skill, and you do it over and over, and you could do your life that way and live in harmony with the world as it was. Now, if you do that, you're going to live totally out of harmony with the world. You have to be able to think and learn and move with this new shifting strategic landscape. And I think that my orientation that became clear to me it's not something I did consciously. It's something I think I intuited, and I think most of us do. But now, as I see, having worked with the world's leading social entrepreneurs and how they navigate this world of ever, constant change, that there is a way to live in harmony. And the problem is our systems were built for repetition and our mindsets were built for repetition. And so moving into this world of dynamic complexity requires a very different way of thinking and working. So I feel much more, frankly, I feel more at ease working this way than I do just sort of moving into steady routine.
That makes so much sense to me. And it's also sort of in sync with Buddhism and some deeper knowledge because, like in mindfulness, you sort of pause and the whole premise is you're supposed to just observe your own thoughts, like not to stop thinking, but to observe. And through that sort of be more aware and more centered. And it seems like in your movement in life, you've sort of realized that when you do that periodically, you're able to recalibrate and reassess and learn from what you've done, during the motion. And it seems like it's really working for you, right?
Yeah, but it's scary though. I'm not going to say it is, and again, we look for ways to, like we're not free spirits here, right? We're not just kind of flowing with the wind and kind of doing, we're very conscious about how we make our decisions. But we also know that at the end of the day that, our family has to be flexible and nimble. I even talk about with my kids when they were young, I'd say, how many revenue streams do I have? Because if I had only one, that was pretty precarious. I wanted them to understand that I do speaking here, I do books here, I do consulting there, and I have a job. And so, I'm always constantly trying to figure out how to accommodate this world of complexity. So it's not easy at all. I think the key is I've gotten to know change makers, and as we're living in this world of complexity and as we're trying to build a generation that can come into this world of complexity, think about what we've just gone through, what we're going through now with the pandemic, and the narratives that are going around with that. Like I hear things of, well, my kids lost their prom or they lost their little league or they lost different things. And we talk about what was lost, but we actually also should think about what kids are getting. I mean, I think we're preparing probably the greatest generation right now because they've learned to go into homes. They've got their teacher on their screen and their parents over their shoulder because we're now new teachers. We're trying to figure out how their lives in the classroom. I'm way more engaged with my kids' schooling than I ever was before. So now they've learned how to deal with adversity. They've learned how to be isolated. They've learned how to connect. They've learned how to navigate this world of constant change. So this, I think, is going to serve them really, really well. If we could get our narrative straight around this for our young people and talk about the resilience also. I mean, I'm very sensitive to the loss and the hardship of people in this pandemic. So I don't want to sugarcoat that. But I do want to also say our kids are resilient and they are learning and they are growing. And if we can bring that into their consciousness and bring that into their conversation, rather than sort of leave it behind, I think we'll serve our kids better if we talk about their resilience and what they've learned as they've gone through this challenging time.
It's a little bit about how we frame things also to them.
I found that in Changemaker Playbook, that was one of the most important. We have a whole chapter on define thyself lest you be defined. I was, again, I'm sensitive to this personally. Like I was defined by my area code. And that was a way for people to say, he's small. They're just, they're just rural. Right. And so it was a way to kind of dismiss me, right? But I think all of us have those labels that are being put on us. And if you don't take that act of defining who you are and knowing who you are and stepping into your bigness, then you will be defined into your smallness. That's just the physics of how things work in the world.
Did you try to prove to them that you are big, or was it more of stepping into your own greatness, or both?
Well, look, again, growing up rural, so in some ways people would say growing up small, that I think this got into my consciousness. When I was a labor organizer, I remember I would go to a workplace and I would meet people and let's talk about, just say your name. And I'd hear things like, well, I'm Robert and I'm just a parks worker. I'm Lawanda, I'm just a lunchroom worker. I found that this kind of idea that we were all made small, right, by our labels and some of those things, it really did, I think it did kind of, it struck me, it was confronting for me. And so And again, if you look at the Obama campaign, one of the things I realized was that after Hillary got out, so I had always had this kind of sensitivity about this. When Hillary left the race, we were about to face John McCain, who's, the Republican nominee. And what I found was interesting was there was like an outbreak of smallness in the campaign. People felt small. We were bringing in all the pros too. And so you're feeling like all these, people you've seen on TV and heard about are suddenly coming into the campaign. What I realized was that people had gotten as small as the details of their work. And it was the details of our work that made us big. And so I realized at that moment that if we were going to succeed, I had to be more than the chief operating officer. I had to be the chief business officer. I had to help everyone step into their business, see the value of what they were doing. We had this group of people who were in charge of kind of our travel. And so you'd call them and you'd book travel. We had a system where you'd book it and then you'd call them and then they'd say, but they would educate you about some steps you could take that might save us some money, but also you could get off the plane. Back then there wasn't plane Wi-Fi. So you could get off, make a few calls, get back on, and it would save some money and you would make the choice, but they would educate you. What they did was every week they gave me a report of the money that they saved with their leadership interventions. And the money that they saved in 16 months was enough money for us to run the campaign in a small state that we would not have otherwise been able to play in. And so this idea then is that they were called the travel bookers, but really they were responsible for the culture and the mindset and the stewarding of resources, and their leadership was saving us a lot of money. But you don't see that in your everyday. So this idea of stepping into your business is not like, how powerful can I be? If we were going to do the next step and win that election, everyone was going to have to step into their full bigness, see the big picture, no one passive, everyone has to play fully to be able to get us to the next point. So this idea of stepping into your bigness, and I can't help you step into your bigness if I can't even get myself up into mine. But also stepping on someone else is not stepping into your bigness, right? So we've got to just be clear about what I mean when I say that. It just means that you've got to realize your full authentic potential. You've got to step into that, and you've got to help others do that. And it's back to this early idea of dream work is teamwork, right? So then you can bring everybody together, and you can all flourish and thrive.
And how can people do that? How can a person listening step into their full potential?
Well, I think first, if you go for 3 steps again, to use Ronan's thing, 3 things. One, I think you have to first define yourself. You have to know who you are. You have to define yourself against the labels that that are being used against you. You have to understand what you're passionate about and step into that passion as well. Take that bet on yourself. And then I think, and I saw this with the changemakers I wrote about. They literally framed their narrative, right? And they framed the narrative in a different way. They always had a framework change or a frame change about what they were doing, what people said they were doing versus what they were doing. So there was constantly a battle there that was going on. And then I think the other part of it is just being able to tear down walls. Because you can't do this if you don't step into your bigness. The ability to tear down walls and bring 2 or more sides together that wouldn't otherwise connect. That's when innovation happens. That's when impact happens. And I saw this in the Obama campaign all the time. When we empowered people at the lower and middle rungs of the organization to step into their bigness, what we found was that they didn't do things the way we did at the top. They didn't have a meeting and then report back and then go back to your silo, tell everybody what to do and report back. They actually worked fluidly across the organization, across those silos. They looked at people's talents and they saw the problem or the opportunity in front of them, and they recruited based on that person's talent, based on that person's possibility, not based on their job title, not based on the lane that they'd been put in. And so what we found was that people could tear down walls and bring others together around a problem or opportunity. That was the requisite new leadership skill for this new way of working. And now we're in a world where things are moving fluid and fast and all over the place. You have to be able to tear down walls, bring 2 or more sides together around a problem or opportunity, that again is when impact and innovation can happen. So I think that, but if you can't do that, and it can be very simple. My wife brought together a whole community that was isolated, shut in. She talked about loneliness. Something like 70% of people feel like they experience loneliness. She took the boys to the different doors, knocked on the doors, and formed a book group. In week 1, it was a book group. In month 9, it was a flourishing community that had activities. People were coming to each other's events. They were, barbecues, the whole thing. And so we transformed a community based on about 12 women coming together every month around a book.
It's like you're leaning by working for everybody that works for you at the same time and empowering them and make them better, which is like a leading and management skill where I'm wondering if it's like natural. Was it like a talent, or was it a skill or a reflex that got better?
Boy, I don't know. The thing is, what I've found is it's less about empowerment and more about enablement. When I go to a boardroom, or I go into a classroom, or I go into a town hall, it doesn't matter where I go. And I've done this exercise with second graders. I'll just say this. Might have to frame it differently for second graders, but innovative mind, service heart, entrepreneurial spirit, collaborative outlook. How many of you are that? Everyone's hand goes up. In my second grade class, there was only one hand that didn't go up, and I think he was probably the most change maker in the group, frankly. But everyone's. That's how we relate. That's how we see ourselves. And the challenge then, so people say, how do I become a change maker? Well, I think we already see ourselves as change makers. The problem is I might not see you as a change maker. You might not see me as a change maker, but we see ourselves as change makers. And so so I don't find that convincing people that they're a change maker is the challenge. I think the real challenge is, the question I usually get is this: I'm everything you said, but when I go to school, I can't be that. Or when I go to the office, I can't be that. And so I think what we have then is a problem of not empowerment. It is enablement. It is about helping people have the tools and the resources and the system that allows them to be a change maker. And as the world now is moving faster and faster, where problems are outpacing solutions, and this is where I think we did intuitively right in the Obama campaign, and I think in any organization I really try to stay focused on this. You have to be able to enable everyone to play fully and confidently from where they are in this new environment. And so if you're a business, if you're a CEO, I would suggest that the number one KPI for any business now is how many of our people are change makers. Same thing for teachers, same things for parents. That's the number one question. How many of our people are change makers? Because we're going to have to be able to tear down walls, come together around problems and opportunities all the time in this world where change is the only constant. The problem is, again, we have systems that were built for repetition. They might have made sense in the world that we are leaving behind, but as we leave the world of millennia behind of repetition, we're now going into millennia of change making. And the system, you put a change maker in that old hierarchical, rigid system, they can't function. And the same way is if you put a non-change maker in an open system, an open fluid system, it's not. So we've got to start to retool now and orient to fluid, open teams of teams, and preparing people to be able to play in that system, because that's where our challenge is. It's not who's a change maker. It's, are we building systems that allow people to be and act as change makers?
So if I'm like a CEO, I have 1,000 workers right now, okay, and I want to check quickly and differentiate the change makers and non-change maker, or at least understand if we were more change maker-y or not. What would be a good way to notice?
Look, I love, one of the things, first of all, I think it's harder to have this conversation to say, are you a change maker or not? Because I default to, I see change makers. Having said that, one of the challenges, I think, is that we don't see that the game has changed. And so we don't actually see the necessity for change. So let me sort of zoom out for a minute and give us a different example. Football player. He's in the locker room. He's getting ready for the big game, right? He's prepared his whole life for this game. It's an American football player. So it's a gladiator sport with the pads and the helmet and the whole thing. And you're going to slam into each other. It's what, and so he charges out of the locker room, out onto the field. Again, the game he's prepared for his whole life, goes out of that tunnel and onto the field, and the lights and the dancing and all the excitement, everything he's ever known. He is excited for this moment. And then suddenly you see his pace start to slow. He starts to track toward those players on the field that he's going to join. His pace starts to slow. Something's wrong. The 2 steel spires on each end of the field are down, and now there's these 2 nets. And the players don't look anything like him. They don't have the big heavy gear. They have flowing hair. They chase after a very different football. This one spins out a black and white pattern low across the ground. And so what's happened? The game has changed. Now he's got 3 choices. Either he doubles. Well, first he can just stand frozen and doesn't know what to do, and he's going to get pushed to the sidelines. The second thing is he can double down on what he's been prepared for his whole life, which means lowering those shoulder pads and helmet and slamming into those unsuspecting players with the flowing hair and, the loose clothing, and tackling them to the ground. And again, he's going to get moved to the sidelines. I think the problem is we have this conversation without talking about how the world has changed. And so the third thing for our player then is to take off, to see the game, try to learn the game, and then understand it. And so that means taking off that big heavy gear, working new muscles that you've never worked before, training differently, training your players differently. So I know a CEO who looked at his organization and said, we have to help people understand the changing business strategic landscape. We need our staff to be in this game, not passive, which is what we've been kind of taught to be, right? That's our mindset. That's the way we've been groomed. And so what he would do is he would find the change maker, let people identify who they think is the change maker, and then they would use that to model how they do different trainings and different kinds of things that they were, how does a change maker learn differently? What do we need to teach differently to ourselves? What can we learn? And so they basically built a core group that would model what they were trying to show. And it's just the same thing with my social entrepreneurs. Like, that is a group of people who show us how to play this new game, because I think it's too hard to sort of like do the things that we know how to do, which is, figure out some kind of pros and cons list. And here's the prescribed training that everyone takes. How do you do it differently? I think it's I think we're learning. And so we have to understand the context for the change and then how to model that in a way that we all can come along and not feel like, oh, they're the good ones and we're just not really very change maker.
But then you still have a team and you're sort of looking around and you're trying to understand, are they a good fit? Are they change makers? Or are you saying at the end of the day, at the core, we're all change makers and it's about the ecosystem and enabling them to be that?
Yeah, making the culture, right? Is that what you mean, Noah?
Yeah.
I think it's very cultural. I remember from my Obama days, right? We had a very prescriptive, KPI type organization in the very earliest days when we were trying to get control of the, back in the days of hope and chaos. When we went from hope and chaos to change on steroids, the organization had its systems, but we couldn't keep up with the pace of change. So we had to open it up and let everyone step into their leadership. And now how do you control that, right? But we had those norms that we talked about. Build it from the bottom up, respect everyone, no drama, move everyone along together. And so what I'm saying is that we went from going from that sort of reporting kind of culture to a culture where we were curating information. Now I go to a meeting and I'm trying to understand from the people around me what they're doing and report that to others so that we can actually move together more in flow versus more in hierarchy, more than in command and control. And so that's more and more, I think, what we have to figure out how to do as a society is how do we work together in fluid open systems, not how do we close them down and actually move into rigid, and try to double down on the old game. We have to figure out how to play in the new game. And that's going to require a lot. That's not just like something you do at work on day one. I mean, my kids have to learn that when my kids started school, kindergarten, I remember the fact was out. My kids are now 14 and 12, but I remember when they were 5 and 4. And the fact was that in kindergarten, that we were saying that 65% of job types that they will assume don't exist, right? 65% of the jobs that they will assume don't exist in kindergarten. And yet we still had them on the assembly line, the game of repetition to everyone in vocation.
Yeah.
When we know that that's not this, that we even could say that the game had changed, but we couldn't change our systems to accommodate that. So now the onus is now on me, and I'm not against education. My parents are teachers. I'm all for it. All I'm saying is that even the most change maker in education have to live in that system of repetition. And so my job then as a parent was, what are the experiences that our kids need to have so that they can be prepared for everyone a change maker? And those are everyone a vocation and everyone a change maker are two very different games.
So, like, what experiences are those?
It goes back to that very early framework. And this is very clear. If you look at the stories of the change makers in Changemaker Playbook, and there are people that you'll know, Michelle Obama, there are people that you've never heard of that you'll never forget. But it really comes down to four things, if I was to give you a framework. Learning and mastering empathy before you're 7. And that means I have to be able to model it as an adult. The adults in their lives have to really then work on empathy as a conscious thing. The second thing is learning around your passion. And by the way, this sounds so easy, but how many times do we say to our 7-year-old or 8-year-old when they're just starting to get their own kind of ideas, you can't do that. You don't want to squash bugs. You're going to be a doctor. You're not going to be an exterminator, right? I mean, those are the kinds of things that we worry about, what they're already taking on and what don't play that game, even if they're just playing a little card game or whatever, or don't kick that ball around, whatever. All of those things, how they learn when they're 7 and 8 is really important, and we're not paying attention to that. The third thing is, in your teens, getting your own idea, particularly if it's an idea that benefits other people, and putting a team around that idea and learning how to work collaboratively as co-leaders. I think this is a point too, again, earlier to our conversation, it's not about my leadership. I'm a co-leader. Unless we think about the old paradigm for leadership, and then somebody's got to be the leader. And then the last thing is learning outside of your zip code, outside of your environment, outside of what you're comfortable with.
Right, like both literally and figuratively. Like you have to also just step out of your comfort zone, but also like really go somewhere else.
I think both. I mean, maybe we can't go across the world, but we can all leave our zip codes. We can all leave our neighborhoods. And there's ways then. I think even as, saw a wonderful program the first time I was in Australia where kids would leave their school to go intern in a shop because they wanted to be business leaders.
That's definitely like forcing the change is what you talked about in COVID, right? So you force people into the change and you're going to see the ROI soon, even that it looks dark. Now I understand it perfectly from that example.
That's a great point.
What's your superpower?
I don't know. I would like to think the thing I work hardest at is this one thing we talk about, the requisite leadership skill, the ability to tear down walls and bring 2 or more sides together around a problem or opportunity. But I really loved once somebody described me as a mentor of leaders. And it captured my imagination for myself, because I do think that I want to be sure that everyone around me is stepping into their bigness so that we can play at our fullest potential. And being a mentor of leaders, I think mentorship goes 2 ways, so it's not a one-way thing. And I also think that it really indicates this idea of co-leadership. And that there isn't a leader who's and there's a bunch of subordinates. I learned still today from, like I did, when was the Obama campaign? It was more than a decade ago. I still learn today the most from the 27-year-olds in my life. So I believe that mentorship, that act of mentoring new leaders is also them mentoring me at the same time. And your kryptonite? I think systems that are built for the old game and where people are doubling down on those systems, and when I think we've moved past those. So I think, again, I still think the change maker trying to live in that rigid hierarchical system, we're not going to see the innovation, we're not going to see the breakthroughs that need to happen. And so I'm constantly looking at ways to enable people in those environments. And I think I'm a good resource for people who are it's the number one question I get from people who are in those systems or people who are leading them and want to do something about it. I think that's where the game is right now, is how do we shift systems to accommodate our changemaker world and do that in a way that is respectful of where we come from, and what we're the environments that we've been living in and the mindsets we've had, and not being too impatient. But I believe that we now live in a world where we have moved from social responsibility, 2 words, to social responsibility, 3 words. And we need systems that can accommodate change makers acting on social responsibility.
Beautiful. And it's so insightful. Where can we send people who want to learn more?
Well, so, you can come to changemakerplaybook.com. You can come to my website, henrydecio.com. I'm happy to, share these ideas and help people through whatever challenges that they're having, moving into the new game.
I have to thank you for 2 things. So first of all, you're manufacturing change makers, meaning, just inspiring those people. But what I thank you for is doing it in a way of optimism and abundance. So articulating it in a good way, and the opportunities, because there is bad. I appreciate that, because we need more of that. So thankful for inspiring on that side, and thanks for your time.
Thank you. Look, I'm very hope and changeful.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Real life.
Superpowers.
Up in the sky, it's a bird. It's a plane.
Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology.
It's alive.
Real life.
Superpowers.